Hello. Yes. Great. So thank you so much for this
Just
incredibly interesting film. I'm sure we all have a lot to say and a lot of questions to ask the filmmaker, but Yulia and I had a few questions we wanted to start off with. First of all, could you tell us a little bit more specifically about how this film came to be? What did you want to do with it? Did you know Oleg Sentsov? What gave you the idea for making this film? Can you tell us a little bit the origin story of this film?
Thank you. Well, I met Oleg Sentsov 3 years before he was arrested in means 2011. He just texted me on Facebook. We haven't been familiar before. He texted me that he's a filmmaker as me, and he's just finishing for his first feature film in Crimea, and he have somewhere on internet have seen my diploma work, and he liked my documentary, and he just wanted to share his impressions. So we started to communicate, and the only time we met each other it happened in Moscow during the premiere of his film. Gamer. And when Oleg was arrested and moved to Moscow for the first court trials, I just went where to see him, and in order him to see me, just to support somehow. And I didn't have an idea of how all the process is figured out in Russia, and so it was. I was shocked, of course, and basically because of how it looks like all the case looked absolutely fake, and it seems that neither prosecutors or judges they didn't care about how it looks like, and when I shared my ideas to a friend of mine who is film director as well, and he said that why don't you make a documentary about all the happening now? And I thought that for me it was the only maybe position in this courtroom with a camera, and because I cannot help Oleg somehow. The only thing I can do is just to fix and just to make this document.
And how did you get funding?
It was the most difficult way, maybe, because we didn't have problems. I didn't have problems because I was the only cameraman and soundman and everything. With the shooting inside the courtrooms, because they wanted this trial look like legal and open.
The Russian legal system wanted.
Yes.
So they let you be there so that it would look like a show trial.
Yeah, the show trial.
It would look not like a show trial, look like a real trial.
But but they wanted to show this show trial. Of course, it was their aim. But we were funding for a long time. Of course we couldn't find any fundraising in Russia.
No.
Yes, but and even in Ukraine. So we had two crowdfunding, international and Ukrainian, and we succeed to raise some small money. But We raised money with the help of our co-producer in Poland, Dariusz Jablonski, who is the president of Polish Film Academy, and he he helped us with get money from Polish Film Institute, and then we get some money from Czech television, and the production company was Estonian, so this is Estonian, Polish, Czech production.
So the entire post-Soviet and post-socialist space.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it.
Okay, I have also a question on filmmaking process itself and the choices you made for the film, because we see that you, I mean, choices between different narrative lines you could have explored actually in the story, because we see that you have decided to highlight some episodes actually, the trial itself, of course, the broader context in Russia, repression in Russia. Relationship between Putin and political cultural elites also. But you remain very restrained on some other issues, actually on the family issue. Because we have this episode with, you mentioned through the narrative of Natalia, and she told us there is a division within Oleg Sentsov's family, between him and her sister, which is something not so rare actually in Ukraine. I would say infrequent, seeing families being divided by the events. So why have you decided to just mention it and now go deeper into those family questions?
Thank you. Because the whole task of the film was very complicated to make this composition of many lines, of the context line, of the case line, the family line, and Oleg Sentsov as a person and a filmmaker a little bit. So many things to be mentioned, but in one film, in one composition. So it was difficult, and only with the help of great editor, Polish editor, Michał Lysholowski, we managed to make this. And another aspect is that these family issues are very sensitive for Oleg Sentsov. You didn't ask about Oleg's wife,
Yeah.
but this question is very obvious, and I decided not to mention it in the film because it's very, I think it's very hard for Oleg himself. And answering this question briefly, they didn't. The situation was complicated before Oleg was arrested, and they didn't live together with his wife and children. Lived mostly with Oleg and with Oleg's mother. And after Oleg Sentsov was detained, his wife just divorced him. And in Russia we have this procedure when you don't need exception of your husband or your wife if he or she is imprisoned. So now he doesn't have a wife.
And can you also talk a little bit about some of the difficulties in filming? So that's very interesting that in the scene with the family, you're making certain choices about not following up on certain questions or certain issues. But can you talk a little bit more about the reality of filming the trial? I mean, I understand that the Russians were pleased to have you there to show the world how great their legal system is. But it seems like there are times where maybe your camera was hidden more, and times where the camera is sort of, where it's clear that you had the camera. There are times where they say, like, put the cameras away. Did you ever have problems in the scenes where you're with, like, the lawyer in the cafe talking about the trial? Did people sort of give you looks? So what were some of the difficulties in actually filmmaking?
For me, the most difficult was that this is the very new filmmaking for me, because usually I just observing the situation and following the characters where they go, and no questions, no fiction scenes, just following and following. This requires a long time, but now in this film, of course, it's absolutely different, because it's partly like investigation and like TV format, and partly as observation. As I mentioned, we almost all the time we had permission to film inside the courtroom, at least some scenes, or for example, during the main trial, I was allowed to film not inside the courtroom, but in the lobby where this monitors they like broadcasted all the time, and I didn't have permission to film inside the prison when Natalia, the cousin of Oleg, goes to send this package, and it was hidden camera, and yes, but we have two hidden cameras, one of FSB hidden camera, and the second is mine. So I think it's not a problem. And in cafes with a lawyer, the most difficult it was like if you when you knew that you are followed with sometimes or all the times with some FSB guys, and we noticed a few times when we met in cafes, some strange guy by the next table just pretended to sitting in. Okay, and when your cell phones are being tapped, and so it was difficult, and I passed through a period of paranoia when you're afraid all the time, and sometimes you get up in the night because you thought that somebody stands behind the door, and yes, this is the most difficult part.
A question concerning, you bring up this sequence on exchange, the issue of exchange of prisoners between Ukraine and Russia through the press conference of the President Putin. And from the movie, we have this sense that you're very pessimistic concerning possibility, actually, of exchange of prisoners. But one of the four persons convicted in this case have been exchanged. I'm talking about Gennady Afanasyev. Could you, maybe you have this information, where we are actually in those negotiations? And do you think that your movie, which is an advocacy, of course, movie also, helped to bring up to light this question, and maybe in some way also help to, make much more possible this possibility of exchange?
Thank you. I hope that this movie could help just to keep the attention focused on these problems, because of course Oleg Sentsov is not the only political prisoner, Ukrainian political prisoner in Russia at the time. I don't know the certain number, but we talk about a few, I think dozens of political prisoners, and we have many film festivals, and sometimes we have negotiations with Amnesty International or some political organization, and some activists trying to organize screenings at, for example, European Parliament or somewhere else to invite some politicians to the screenings and so on and so on. Regarding Gennady Afanasyev exchange, of course, it was a big surprise, and it was. We were hopeful that Oleg Sentsov and Alexander Kolchenko must be the next, obviously. But I don't know. This system has its own some logic, and nobody knows how it moves. So when a month ago. By the way, we have some updates about the place Oleg Sentsov is now. He's not in Yakutsk at the moment because a few weeks ago he was moved. Not few weeks, because this process of relocation takes months, and during 2 months and a half. He was moving from one prison to another, and now he's in Labutnagi. This is the place. Is much closer to the North Pole. This prison's name is White Bear, and the conditions there are much more tough than when. Were in Yakutsk, and nobody knows why did they decide to relocate him. Because when they started to relocate, we had a hope that they just prepared for some exchange or something, but nobody expected that they just. Want to relocate for some reasons to make the conditions tough, and now Oleg has now because of that Oleg has problems to his health, some problems to his heart. From the very beginning, I was expected that maybe they just keep him for some special event like football championship or Putin's next elections in Russia, something like this. But nobody knows.
So as a scholar of the 20s and 30s and the arts in the Soviet Union, again, watching this film is incredibly resonant in several ways. In particular, that scene with Putin and the filmmakers, where it's Kurov. Yeah, says like "Ya umilyayu vas" and talks about milosердие, and this sort of line of discourse to Putin that's not about, are you totally crazy? This is absolutely falsified. But oh, he's young, have mercy, please. Great leader, please have mercy, right, on us artists, right, and Putin's response, right. I mean that's all very Soviet, and the way the trial works under Stalin, it's always about blowing up a monument, right? And there's this sort of strange, on the one hand, awareness of falsification, right? And later when the GPU or NKVD agents are interrogated, they freely admit, of course, we knew we were making it up. We had to get people help us. We needed some German phrases. We had to ask an expert what this would be in German. So they're aware of making up cases, and yet at the same time following a legal system, right? And sort of acting as if they believe in what they're doing, and sort of the way that the artists themselves talk about what's happening in their community, right? So it's both of these, it's a sort of fluid, it's completely false, but somehow no one's standing up and saying that. And the speech that Oleg gives at the end, when he gets the final word, so one that's so interesting to me, in a lot of the end of the interrogations, artists are given the chance to speak, and as a scholar, I'm like, how is anyone allowing them to say the things that they're saying, right? But they are. So similarly here, I'm amazed Oleg wasn't cut off, right, with this sort of monologue that he's giving about the state of affairs in Russia. And he's putting himself very clearly, by citing Bulgakov and Masteri Margarita, he's very clearly putting himself in this lineage of artists, right? In this sort of lineage of Soviet artists fighting the state. And it seems to me, I mean, I wonder how aware of that he is, how aware of that legacy of the Soviet artist you are, and how you worked with Sentsov. In other words, how much was his awareness of, I'm being filmed, there is this documentary being made, this is going to a larger audience outside Russia. How much did that awareness of his relationship with you and with the filmmaking process and with this larger world shape the film?
Thank you. First of all, about the things that looks like the same of like Soviet. I had absolutely the same feeling, and I even have a feeling that it was never interrupted, and we don't have some new Russia. We have some maybe new Soviet Union, because all the system is the same, as looks like the same. And about cooperation with Oleg, I didn't have a chance to talk to him during making this film. I only have an ability to communicate with him via the lawyer, the attorney, and first of all, I just got a permission to meet, not to make this film, but to meet his family and children, because for me it was very important that, and he knew that what am I doing, and I think that of course he prepared all his speeches during the trial, not for me only, but the whole audience. Of course, not for judges or for prosecutors or for somebody, but for audience. And I felt that for Oleg it was very important to have this ability to say something for the audience. And in a way, he's a co-director of this film.
Yeah. Great.
Let's open
should we
the
open it
discussion up.
Can I take, I'll take the first one.
Okay, go ahead.
Great. Okay, Dominique, please.
The last words in the trial is don't be afraid, right? When he tells the 1/3 of Russian people. Well, you're not afraid yourself, because you're Russian and you live in Moscow, you're making a film like this that premieres in Berlin, and what are the consequences for you? What had been the consequences for you of making a film like this? Will the Russian government doesn't care, or is it making things a little more dicey?
Just a little correction. He says, learn not to be afraid.
Learn not to be afraid. Yeah.
That's important.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm frequently asked about where do I live at the moment, and do I have any problems to authorities or not. I don't. I didn't have any problems during I was filming, and now I don't have problems with the authorities, and don't have problems with crossing borders and coming, for example, here to Canada. I don't know why. Maybe the queue, the line is too long, and and they don't have another guys. Maybe not. Maybe they just don't care about me. It's not absolutely the same Soviet times in Russia at the moment. We have of course many differences. We have the borders opened, and we have at least few medias in Russia, even paper, real paper, newspaper, some internet TV channel, and some online medias. So of course we have this difference.
There is, yeah, it's over there. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah,
Could we get a
just
microphone?
wait,
Yeah.
wait for a mic.
Same spirit, has the film, is the film available in Russia, and what has the reaction to it been?
Thank you. No, we haven't yet premiered the film in Russia. We tried to, but some film festivals they just refused to include in program with no explanation, of course. But you know, it's not officially forbidden or banned in Russia, but the system works like they just send you signals, and you have to, if you are a director of a film festival, you have to understand yourself what to do. So, but I hope in a week we will have news about another independent film festival in Russia, in Moscow, if they will include the film to their program. So if they do, so we will premiere the film next month in Russia, and shortly after that we will put it online on online medias.
Maria Sonovitsky, right here.
First, I wanted to say thank you for making this film. It was very moving and important, I think. I have one small question and then one bigger question. I was hoping maybe you could interpret for us the scene that comes early in the film that I think is an FSB video capture of the fire that is lit, and then the gentleman with the fire hydrant like leaps out from behind the corner and extinguishes it. So what was that meant to show exactly in the course of the trial, and how was it kind of positioned by the FSB prosecutors? The bigger question, however, is kind of the basis upon which Sentsov feels Ukrainian. And holds to this idea of Ukrainian citizenship, because in my own research in Crimea, it was kind of rare to encounter Russians who identified themselves as ethnic Russians, who had a very strong kind of sense of Ukrainian pride. And I'm not asking you to answer that question necessarily, but I'm curious, among his family in Crimea, for example, was that a widely shared belief, or were they dismissive of his commitments to the Ukrainian state, for example? Was that something that came up in conversation? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. What about this episode of court evidence? It took place indeed in Crimea and Simferopol, and Afanasyev and Kolchenko they participated this action because in this office of pro-Russian organizations, these places, the rooms. Were used for these guys who detained pro-Ukrainian activists in Crimea, and arrested. It was illegal, how to say, самооборона, self-defense guys. They're not military or police, just like civil guys with weapon who could detain any pro-Ukrainian activists and prisoned there in these offices of pro-Russian parties. And this they had information that they were tortured there. So, as Kolchenko and Afanasyev explained, this action, when they tried to burn these places, it was their protest. So, Afanasyev and Kolchenko, they participated in this action. And FSB, they tried to use this to say that they were extremists and they had some connection to right sector, this radical organization. I don't know why, but and they tried to say that Oleg Sentsov was the key person of this organization, that they had organization, and Oleg Sentsov was the leader of this organization of right sector wing in Crimea and so on. I know this is very complicated, but they tried to make a big case using many different persons, many different episodes, and just to create some connection and illusion of big network of something like this. And trying to answer a question, I forgot about the second part.
It was just about whether his family identified also.
Yes, thank you. I think this is something new for Ukraine, because some Russian-speaking people and Russians, even in Crimea, they during the Maidan revolution, they suddenly tried to identify there as the Ukrainians, as like a nation, you know. And Oleg Sentsov was one of them, and Afanasyev as well. Kolchenko, I don't know, he's Russian-speaking too. And what about the family? You know, his sister doesn't share this. Of course, what about his mother? I think she. Of course, I had an ability to talk to her about this when I was in Crimea, and she, of course, she supports Oleg, but she's mother, you know. She supports Oleg. She doesn't like what happens after the annexation, and of course she's modern, and she tries to understand her daughter, and actually these were her words about she's between two fires, and she tries to understand her son and daughter, or I mean about sister, about between brother and husband and son. And when we were editing this film, we decided not to give these words to her, and this is why we asked Oleg's cousin to to explain the situation, because it's I don't know. I think it was not. It wouldn't be correct to use mother for this explanation.
Great. Other questions? Yes, in back. Yeah.
I would like to ask a technical question. For example, you are showing the scene where two guys, one is Cherny, as far as I remember, that one who was identified as insane by Oleg Sentsov, right? I'm not sure if he's insane or not, but that guy who contacted the person, the specialist in chemistry, and they're discussing their attitudes towards life in general. How did you get this material? Because it looks like the documentary that was got by Federal Service of Security, and how did you get it?
Thank you. This is the material of FSB, of course, and it was just a part of the case, of the legal case, and so I just got this material from Sentsov's attorney. It was just on the CD discs, and it was shown as an evidence during the court trial in Russia. The whole 3 hours and a half, and it's very interesting as a separate movie.
I have noticed that Oleg Sentsov called Putin a bloody dwarf. You know, it doesn't sound funny because almost any country has some limitations, legal limitations on calling names on the political leaders. How could you comment on this situation? Because when he said dwarf, it's definitely about his height, not about his, let's say, greatness or non-greatness as a politician, because his greatness is accepted by anybody, I believe, due to his influence on the events in the world. So it was exactly like calling names, right?
I don't know. Actually, when when I was there during this court trial, I didn't feel confused because of these words, and I didn't feel that Oleg crossed any boundaries in this question. Because I don't remember. I forgot at the moment. This poem of Mandelstam about Stalin, and it was very very cruel about him, and so of course it was dangerous, and this is why Mandelstam he wasn't punished to death, but he was just sent to Voronezh for a long time. So I think that sometimes it's not calling. It is calling names in direct meaning. Maybe the bloodly drafted is the real name. Yes. Because an artist's task is calling names. To find the names, real names.
Diana?
Thank you. I wanted to ask about the echo of Kafka in this film, because of course the title evokes the trial, and the fact that it's somehow centered around knowing or not knowing what you're sentenced for. I thought was a very sort of a powerful game in there, but in a sense it's also incredibly different, because it seems to me that he is a very willing protagonist, or he knows exactly what this game is about, and in a sense this last speech is him almost willingly accepting this role or somehow taking it up. And I was wondering whether the reason for keeping this echo, or somehow the sameness and the difference between these two situations, maybe artistically as well, not just intellectually. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, of course it was because of Kafka's the trial, because this feeling of absolutely absurd situation gave the name, the idea of the title. But in Russian, this word is процесс, means the process as well, not only a trial but the process. And for me, it's like the process which we have now in country and society, and so on. So this is like double meaning.
Other questions? Yeah.
I have two questions to you. First, I'm still try to understand, why did FSB choose Sentsov as a kind of mastermind of the organization? By your opinion, was he already on his some blacklist, or was it just a random choice? And the second question is more practical. When are you planning to screen your movie in Ukraine?
Thank you. The second question, we already had the premiere in Ukraine in March at Doku Days Film Festival, the biggest documentary film festival in Ukraine. And after that, we had theater release in all the biggest cities in Ukraine. And until now, we have some screenings time to time. The first question.
Why did the FSB choose Sentsov?
Yes, very interesting question, and this is what I tried to find out from the very beginning. Was it mistake or not? Because if it was mistake, anyway, if it was mistake or not, this system goes only one way. It cannot cancel the previous decision. This is how it works. But this is what I was thinking from the very beginning, that he was just a random victim, maybe. But after that, I realized that, first of all, he was in some lists because he had some communication with Ukrainian activists in Kiev from Maidan, and he has an activity in Crimea. He, as it was mentioned in the film, he helped Ukrainian militaries who were blocked in Crimea, and he even tried to organize a rally against this referendum and annexation before the referendum. And of course the FSB knew about him, but why did they choose him for this role of the leader? Maybe because he was one of the most well-known persons in Crimea, and they just achieved a few aims. First of all, they just neutralized Sentsov and all the other activist activity, because as I know, after this Crimean terrorist case, many activists, pro-Ukrainian activists, just abandoned and just moved to Ukraine from Crimea, and others who stayed in Crimea, they just stopped their activity. And this case worked very good for propaganda, for Russian propaganda, and this is how they proved that about dangerous right sector in Crimea, about all these explosions and terroristic attacks and so on.
Natalia.
Thanks for the film. It's made a very strong impression on me. And I have a broader question. In your film makes a very gruesome impression of what's going on in Russia right now. Both in terms of the regime, the way it functions, but also in terms of society at large. You sort of expose yourself to this public reaction. The cousin of Oleg Sentsov is there with the poster, and then she gets attacked, and then the poster is taken away, and the only person who speaks openly has to go to and protest in Ukraine, and he says that the situation is helpless in Russia. How do you see the situation in Russia right now? And did you get any support on the ground while making the film? Was there some solidarity and some maybe some solidarity that wasn't shown in the film? Thank you.
Thank you. The situation in Russia. I don't know, maybe it's almost the same, but we have many activists who just left Russia, go abroad, and some of them go to Ukraine. For example, Oleg Sentsov's cousin, she moved to Ukraine, and now she lives there and works there. We are always waiting for something which what will help change the political situation, because as you know, that we had this protest movement in 2012, and then in 2012 we were so inspired, and it looks like we just need a little time to change everything, and nothing happened. And after that, the system changed a lot in political life, and after that we had more and more political prisoners, but I don't know. In this spring, during protest meetings, suddenly many young people, like school students and school children, went to the streets, and it was absolutely unexpected, and nobody knows why they suddenly appeared at this meeting. So I don't know how and when, but I hope that the situation will change quite soon.
And what do you think about making movies as part of changing the political situation? So, like, on the one hand, with this film, Oleg Sentsov is still in prison. It hasn't done anything. On the other hand, you have a large international audience caring about Oleg Sentsov and watching this very moving movie, right? And you're sort of educating the larger sort of documentary filmmaking going crowd about the situation in Russia. So what can art do?
Thank you. I don't believe that some movie can change the situation. I do believe that a movie can change some certain person who can influence the situation, or persons. So, of course, it looks like everything we do, even in support of Oleg Sentsov, everything is in vain, because we are like Kurov, who's one of the most famous and great Russian film director who has to humiliate and begging this president, and we all like doing something in vain. But I do believe that we must do this, because we cannot not to keep doing this, right? And we have an experience of Soviet times when, for example, I don't know, Sergei Parajanov, who was imprisoned, and many European artists, and they tried to help him, and all the time they had some petition to Soviet government, and as I remember, only after Louis Aragon said that he only will come to Soviet Union after Sergei Parajanov would be free, and this helped somehow. I don't know. Maybe something will happen the same to Oleg Sentsov.
Do we have other?
I have another one.
Great.
In a sense, this is a Russian film. This is about the Russian justice system. Of course, this is about the Russian annexation of Crimea. But this is also a Ukrainian film. This is a film about a remarkable character who not only identifies Ukrainian, but is actually willing to sit 20 years in the Gulag for his principles. His principles being, Ukraine. But then, of course, you couldn't get funding in Russia, but you couldn't get funding in Ukraine. So you had to go to, actually, it's more than Poland. It's Poland, Estonia, Czech Republic. So kind of the Central Europeans made it possible financially for you to make the film, but you couldn't get funding in Ukraine, and we spent half a day talking about crowdfunding of various things. How do you explain that? It's not like there were not many films made on Maidan. We'll see another one tomorrow, and I'm sure the funding was very difficult, as Lisa will tell us. But it's kind of bugging me that you couldn't get funding in Ukraine, not even partial funding.
I don't know. As I was explained by our Ukrainian co-producer, we had Ukrainian co-producer who is the producer of Oleg Sentsov's films as well, and she tried to help us before she moved to US. She said that the economical situation was very, very difficult, and after Maidan, and the only fund is a state fund, like I don't know, Ministry of Culture, Deshkino, this like state cinema committee, and they tried to finish previous films were producing, were started to be produced previous years, and somehow I don't know, but of course that's strange because it's I think it would be good for any country. I mean, Estonia and Poland and Czech and Ukraine and for Russia to be, for example, premiered in at Berlinale. Because you know, for Russian cinema, it's a very big event, and every time, I mean, once 2 or 5 years, when Russian film goes to such big festivals like Berlinale or Cannes, somewhere else, it's a big event, and all the TV news or they mention about that, but not in our case, because I had a friend on Russian TV, and he said that they had not official, but this directive not to mention about our film at Berlinale. Like, that's interesting. So I don't know why Ukraine didn't give us money.
Well, I think we'll hear more about the Ukrainian film industry and funding tomorrow. But meanwhile, why don't we thank Kurov for his beautiful film. Thank you so much.
Thank you.